Hello, and thanks for tuning into the show that goes around the continent to bring you stories near and far. I'm Joke Rogers at Channels Television here in Lagos, and I'm joined by Vincent McCory from Voice of America in Washington.
Well, thanks. I'm Vincent McCory at the Voice of America. Happy to be with you again for another edition of Africa 54. Let's start off with the latest from Nigeria. Joke Rogers in Lagos brings you that story.
October the 11th every year marks the International Day of the Girl Child across the world. This year, Nigeria joined other countries, as well as the United Nations, to celebrate the girl child with the theme, Our Time is Now, Our Rights, Our Future. To this end, the Federal Ministry of Women Affairs has announced the creation of a division in the ministry to cater to the needs of girls in the country via the adoption of policies and appropriations to alleviate their plight. Globally, October the 11th is set aside annually by the United Nations to raise awareness on the rights of girls. In Nigeria, an international civil society organization called Plan International is meeting with key experts to form a collaboration that will help uphold the rights of girls through sound policies, and they're kicking off with a 5-year plan. According to the organization, the 5-year policy aims at empowering 200 million girls across the world with knowledge of their rights.
Whatever it is we do in Nigeria going forward, we will have young people significantly influence, engage, and be part of our strategy going forward. This is a commitment.
The 2022 International Day of the Girl Child is themed, Our Time is Now, Our Rights, Our Future. The challenges confronting the girl child cuts across most sectors of the economy as they bear the brunt of hardships, especially in times of insecurity, climate change, hunger, and poor health indices. More so, with statistics from the United Nations indicating that 4,000 girls in sub-Saharan Africa are infected with HIV daily.
We need to create a network of young people, a network of volunteers, a network of champions and activists. We need to create partnership. And I'm delighted that we have partners that joined us yesterday and joined us today as well, and the subsequent days, and encouraging the team in Nigeria to ensure that in whatever we do, that we create those partnerships to help us achieve our strategy.
The 5-year policy, which is to commence from 2022 to 2027, is launched with expectations that the federal government will key into the plan to empower girls, and it appears that the government is ready.
This collaboration is one of the important initiatives that the ministry is pleased to collaborate with them, because right from the inception, they were carrying us along, and we have been having meetings with them, and they brought out all that they wanted to do. And we can see that they are not also concerned with only the Nigerian girls, but they are trying to expose them to the international issues that are happening with girls.
It's cheery news for young girls, as upholding their rights has been a major issue that has been on the front burner of public discourse for some time now. Joining us to discuss this is an education advocate and a child rights activist, Ronke Adiabu. Glad to have you today on Africa 54.
Thanks for having me.
Right, so it's known that girls and women are change makers everywhere in the world. But, you know, there's a place where societal issues come into play and societal practices. You know, how limiting do you think societal practices are in, you know, mitigating against, you know, the girl child achieving and moving forward in her life? Here in Nigeria, that is.
Yeah, thanks very much for that question. It's very interesting that in this part of the world, equality in gender is a challenge for us. We don't tend to see the two genders as equal. And in my opinion, we need to have a change of mindset. We need to have this equality mentality, because we tend to see the female gender as subordinate, as, you know, to be seen, not to be heard. You know, their education ends in the kitchen, or they are better in the other room. You know, so all these derogatory approaches to the girl child has been putting the girl child down. It's been affecting their confidence, their self-esteem, and even affecting their ability to be able to access education. And you know, if you don't get education, they don't have the necessary skills to be able to sell themselves and go on and do good things in life. So the societal orientation is constraining the girl child and keeping them down there. And that needs to change. We need to change that narrative. It's not business as usual anymore. The girl child needs to go out there and be treated equally like the male child.
Right, so but there are laws that are being, adopted in various states, those popular laws that protects, children and protect the girl child as well, that ensures that she has the right to education, she has a right to be, to her life vis-a-vis, all of the rights. Do you think those laws are being taken at their face values? Do you think that it's just a law being put out there so that it will be seen that we're doing something and maybe, it's not the same? Something else is being done, or something, the things are not really being done in that sense.
Now, let's put this into context. The Child Rights Act hasn't been domesticated in so many states in Nigeria. What's the point of having a legislation and people don't actually domesticate it or actually actualize it? Then it means we are playing lip service to this. So one of the issues I see about this issue is that the political will is not behind the legislation. Yes, anybody can legislate, but if you don't actually police it and make sure actually it's being implemented properly and there's a penalty for those who go against it, then people will just flaunt it. And that's what's happening. When you see girls' child on the street hawking, why is no one saying to them, why aren't you in school? If parents refuse to send their girl child to school, who is there penalizing that parent? Because if you don't penalize the parents, they would not send their girl child to school. So there needs to be some teeth to that legislation to make sure there's penalty for not sending your girl child to school.
So how much more? What about, coming from the homes? I know you just talked about penalties right now. I mean, it's the government authorities that will ensure that whoever does not, act gets punished. Well, how about taking the advocacy to homes and to ensure that parents know the value of, sending girls to school? It's not just about being a boy, it's about, being a child in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, the government is trying its best, but it's not going far enough. And the government cannot do it all alone. As you know, it's a very complex issue, basically, because there's traditional, there's all sorts of things woven together. The insecurity challenges is also creating problems. So organizations like IE Foundation, which is one of my foundations, is there to help. I mean, on Saturday now, we're going on the street with our placards saying, children must get educated. 20.2 million children are on the street without access to education. That needs to stop. Every child, it's the right of every child to get education, especially the girl child. 60% of the out-of-school children are girls. That is not acceptable. That narrative needs to change. And that's where an organization like mine is supporting the government. We need more NGOs to support the government in this mission. Because as I said earlier, the government cannot socially invest in this alone. So individuals can socially invest as well. We should see it as a communal effort. It's not just about the government now, because the government is doing the bit, they can do legislating and throwing resources where they can, but it's not going far enough. So people like me and you need to do our bit to make sure the girl child is empowered to get education.
Right, and then her right to health and this another protection that the girl child needs. According to the United Nations, the HIV/AIDS indicator, about 4,000 girls get infected with HIV annually in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a huge number. 4,000 seems small when you talk about all the countries in Africa, but it's still a huge number. I mean, how do we begin to tell the girl child to even protect herself from being vulnerable, to these indices?
I mean, this is really very sad because, as you know, girls are naturally vulnerable. Sometimes the girls get raped. Sometimes it might even be someone in the family who is actually sexually violating this child. You understand? I mean, in sub-Saharan Africa and in West Africa, actually, we've got lots of child brides, girls that are in their teenagers, that are now brides. These girls are too young to be getting married. They should be in school. We should try and change the orientation of our men to say these girls need to be left alone, they need education. So there's a whole lot of things that we need to do to actually try and safeguard the girl child. Some of these girl childs are trafficked, actually, abroad. Some of these girl childs with the growth in Yahoo boys and ritualism, they take these girls, use them for rituals, kill them, And all sorts is happening to these girls. So they are like an endangered species, and everyone has a responsibility to protect them.
Right, and for those who we should be protecting, law enforcement, we know that in areas where there's insecurity, where there's insurgency, in northern Nigeria, in other places, not only in the north, and then elsewhere in Africa, we know that these girls are the subject of, you mentioned rape, and, all of the forms of crimes against humanity. If those people are perpetrating it, who protects the girls?
Yeah, again, that's what the legislation is there for. I mean, there is a penalty for anyone that rapes a minor, and it would be nice to see that actually being implemented to the letter. Also, when these cases do go to court, the girl child needs to be protected. Their identity needs to be protected, because there's a stigma around a child that is being raped. That will live with that girl for the rest of her life. So the court system must have a mechanism for protecting the girl child and giving them the courage to come out, to identify the perpetrators, and to make sure they could keep such people behind bars.
So we just talked about the areas where, there's insecurity and there's a lot of abuse for the girl child and, women generally. But that if we stay with that subject, insecurity in itself, especially in northern Nigeria, is the reason why, parents, it's been pegged at that parents don't allow their girls to go to school because of the insecurity. Case in point, the kidnap of the Chibok girls and, other girls that have been going to school in the north, and, attacks on the communities, and they've been abducted, some have been killed. So how do we speak to that? How do we begin to address that?
Okay. So without a doubt, education is under attack in our country. We know what Boko Haram stands for. That is, they don't want Western education. So we need to ensure we don't let them win. Because if we allow the insurgencies to win, then we failed as a nation. The government needs to step up the security of the country, and especially security within schools. They need to reinforce the schools. They need to make sure there's boots on ground, to make sure there are security guards in the school, to make sure there is safeguarding mechanisms in the school, and also to ensure that where we have all the security challenges, we have mega schools. Rather than having schools in ungoverned areas, if you bring all them together and it's a mega school in the town center, it will be very difficult for kidnappers to come and kidnap them, because if there are many children, the children might even overwhelm the kidnappers when they come to kidnap them. And also, in this day of technology, you can use technology to educate the girl child at home. If you think, okay, because most of the schools in Zamfara is closed down at the moment, you could educate them at home. We gave out e-learning devices that it's got all the syllabus there, and you could still get education. And I want to dove my hat to the governor of Borno State. He's been doing some fantastic things to make sure he can get the girl child back into the classroom. So I would advise that the government needs to work extra hard, put extra resources to make sure the schools are well secured and parents are convinced that when their girls go to school, they will come back home. I mean, we know that some girls are still in captivity as we speak. Leah Sharibu is a case in point, So the government must try and get her out, just to convince parents that the government is working at securing the girl child when they're in school.
Right, child rights activist Roke Atiabu, thank you for your time today on Africa 54.
Thanks for having me.
Ethiopia once said it wanted to become the China of Africa, that is, a manufacturing hub with the help of its industrial parks. But the global economic downturn and the country's ongoing conflict have prompted companies to exit the parks and lay off thousands of workers. Henry Wilkins reports from Hawassa, Ethiopia.
The Ethiopian government hoped that this industrial park, opened in 2016 with the potential to create 60,000 jobs, would help the country move from an agricultural to a manufacturing economy, and that the companies would bring high-tech work. Kalkida Nasrat, a logistics manager, shared those dreams.
Bondo Gannett, my birthplace, is a small town. My family worked in agriculture for a living. They were subsistence farmers. As I completed my education, I joined the industrial park, where I managed to improve my life.
There are 10 other industrial parks like Hawassa spread across Ethiopia. The government has said it hoped to make Ethiopia a lower middle-income country by 2025, with manufacturing playing a big part. But that is now looking less likely because of the COVID-19 pandemic, inflation, a lack of foreign currency in the country, and conflict and human rights abuses.
2 of the 13 industrial parks have been impacted directly by, they've been in the combat zone, effectively. But the most severe hit to the industrial parks results from the loss of access to AGOA. 1 week after the announcement, the first company, PVH, I think you know it, they announced that they would retreat from the Ethiopian market. They sold their factories in Ethiopia.
The African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA, passed in the US in 2000 to aid development in sub-Saharan Africa, gave Ethiopia duty-free access to the US market for several products. Many international manufacturing companies set up in Hawassa's industrial sheds. On January 1st, 2022, however, the US withdrew Ethiopia's access to AGOA due to gross violations of human rights. Tigray forces have also been accused of abuses. 35,000 people worked at Hawassa, but in June one firm laid off 3,000 workers and others laid off hundreds. The Deputy General Manager of the park said the withdrawal of AGOA was causing more problems than the pandemic or inflation. In another bad sign for the country's economy, fighting between government and Tigrayan rebel forces broke out again in late August after a 5-month ceasefire. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Hawassa, Ethiopia.
South Africa's Women Economic Assembly has brought together private sector, businesswomen, government and civil society to discuss women's inclusion and participation in the country's economic landscape. The initiative, which pushes for the participation of women-owned enterprises to foster sustainable economic development, was launched by President Cyril Ramaphosa in October 2021 to engage industry leaders to set agenda transformation targets in different sectors of the economy. Our correspondent, Brian Pugani, brings us this report.
This year's theme for the Women Economic Assembly is Unlocking Gender-Responsive Value Chains for a Resilient Economy, with a focus on showcasing how the public and private sectors have implemented their commitment towards their gender transformation in industry value chains.
For too long, we've talked about women only as employees. We're changing that narrative, and we're saying that women are business owners. Women are entrepreneurs, and we are not living in fantasy world when we say that, because women have already been entrepreneurs. They've just been dealing with an ecosystem that's been difficult to break through. Now Wikona is in the house, and we are busy breaking through those barriers to ensure that these women that own businesses are actually participating in the ecosystem.
Given the keynote address, President Cyril Ramaphosa said the reason for starting the assembly was to improve the economic inclusion and participation of women and transform the economy. He also highlighted government's role in enabling that there are more women entrepreneurs in the country.
We are committed to using the policy and legislative tools at our disposal, such as employment equity and the other laws that outlaw discrimination, to improve women's representation in executive leadership and address the gender pay gap.
A panel discussion was done on how preferential procurement can help small firms achieve goals of equitable distribution of resources, enable sustainable development, and play a significant role in promoting gender equality and poverty reduction.
When it comes to procurement, I'm very pleased to report that last year we procured 8.5 billion rand of goods from women-owned businesses. These are businesses that are at least 30% and more owned by women.
We realize that as and when these enterprises will be getting those opportunities from various players, within the South African economy, that you needed to have an entity that would be able to respond directly to that financing need.
We asked some of the participants their suggestions on how the picture can be improved.
If you apply the framework of Wikona effectively, it will literally bring an activity plan that will implement all these frameworks. And fortunately, as a country as well in South Africa, we are the signatories of these initiatives.
The launch of the Gender Impact Collaborative Fund, $20 billion or $1.2 billion for me is the highlight, like an umbrella fund. And we are saying the first quarter of 2023, come back, interview us, we'll tell you. Those ones that make commitment, what they have done, and how the money has been utilized, which sector, how many people have been employed, how many communities have been changed. That's what we are going to talk about.
Businesses from different sectors, together with government departments, pledged not only their support, but also resources and funds to the Women Economic Assembly in their continued initiatives to support women-owned businesses. From Pretoria, South Africa, Brian Pugeni, Channels Television News.
It's time now for a short break. As we do, remind you to visit our website, channelstv.com, for news and programming around the clock. You can also find us at youtube.com/channelsweb. Still to come on the program, an initiative is launched in Libya to strengthen the fight against pollution on beaches and then countrywide. That's in a moment.
Welcome back to Africa 54. I'm Vincent McCory in Washington. Now, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has driven Moscow and Beijing closer, according to a new report that warns of the possibility of Russia and China supporting each other in any future conflict. Henry Ridgwell reports from London.
Russia is this month hosting the Vostok 22 military exercises in the east of the country. 15 countries are taking part, and China is Russia's guest of honor. The drills have been broadcast on state television in both countries.
The practical interaction between the Russian Navy and the Navy of the Chinese People's Liberation Army has reached a new level in terms of quality. This ensures global and regional stability and security.
China and Russia do not yet have a formal military alliance, but share deepening military ties, according to a report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. Arms sales are also a vital part of the relationship, but there are difficulties, says Bonnie Lin, one of the authors of the report.
China imports about 70% of its total arms from Russia. But by the mid-2000s, China began focusing more on domestic production of its arms, so less reliant on Russia. At the same time, Russia became more concerned about Chinese theft of its technology, and more recently, in the past couple of years, most of China's imports from Russia on the arms sales side have been to support its aircraft programs.
The report says China's military capabilities are catching up with or surpassing those of Russia. The Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine has stalled. The report authors say a Russian failure there could lead Beijing to re-evaluate its military relationship with Moscow. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
A 52-year-old Libyan, Ali Rukebi, has launched an initiative to keep the beaches free of garbage with the hope of reinforcing the culture of preserving the environment and putting an end to pollution in the country. For 13 years, Ali has not looked back. He says all he wants to see is a clean beach in Homs and its environs.
This is Homs Beach. Garbage is strewn from one end to the other. Luckily, Ali Rokbi's Sea and the Sun campaign has gained a huge following over the years, as many people come to Homs from across the country clean up. They pick up the waste that has accumulated over time.
Despite the garbage being almost everywhere at the beach, we're trying to reinforce the culture of preserving the environment and putting an end to pollution.
People, including children, head out to the beaches carrying plastic bags and filling them with garbage.
We came here to clean and help with all our hands and efforts to keep our beaches clean. Starting from Homs, we will clean our beaches from the east to the west in order to keep all the shores of Libya clean and everyone can enjoy their time there.
Volunteers hope that the habit will take hold and beach visitors will start cleaning up after themselves.
And that's our show for today. You can find all the continent's top news and world news online at voaafrica.com. Check it out. I'm Vincent McCory in Washington. Channels Television has our last word.
We look forward to bringing you another show next week. To remember that channelstv.com is your source for news and other programming. I'm Joker Rogers. Thanks for watching and goodbye.